Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger potion.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for June 17th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as we talk about a really weird movie that I'm excited about, and also Brendan is in trouble. We're going to talk about that as well.
I'm in trouble?
Brendan is in trouble.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. I saw this movie
Yes.
as well, obviously. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm in trouble.
So Brendan is going to get it. Everyone prepare yourself. I will make this joke for the last time. We're talking about the film Tuesday on a Monday being released on a Thursday after I saw it on a Saturday.
We have no love for the day of Tuesday. I feel like
nope.
Elizabeth Banks' character from the Lego movie. Today will now be known as Freedom Friday, but still on a Tuesday.
Exactly. That's pretty much how this is going. It's Tuesday, but on another day that's not Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely.
At any rate, the reason Brendan is in trouble is because we had a conversation about what movies could we discuss for the show this week.
We had
of
a few
course, we were
options.
going to do Inside Out 2, which that review is already up. Please go and check that out. It was a lot of fun.
Yep. Long one, but a lot of fun.
Yep. And then we decided on Tuesday, Brendan's like, I have this film in my area. We should go see it. And I said, okay, let's do it. Now,
Okay, so I'm the one in trouble, but you're the one who listened.
I listened, yes, because you suggested we do Tuesday. Now, why is Brendan in trouble for suggesting this movie?
Because I broke
because
Katie's spirit.
he failed to inform me what this film is really about. I knew that
You should do
it
your
was
own research.
about.
It's not my job for you.
It is your job to warn me about these things. You know how I was going to react. And instead of giving me a warning,
look this up on your own time. You could look it
I
up
don't
and know
have
what you're getting
time for
into.
this.
You don't have time to read a plot summation. Okay.
No, I had no idea.
That's funny. That's funny.
The only thing I knew is that it was about confronting death, but that could mean a lot of things. That's a broad synopsis. I don't really know what that means. And instead of being like, JD, fair warning, there's going to be elements of this film that will upset you. I could properly go in with the right expectations. And no, you left me to my own devices. How dare you?
First off, that's not my job. And secondly, I did not even know that this movie was going to get into the specifics of that type of mother-daughter dynamic. All I knew was that it was about a mother and daughter confronting death in some way, and that death took the form of a bird. That's all that I knew. That is all that I knew about this. So I plead the fifth. And in situations like this, you can easily find the time to read a plot synopsis that takes 25 seconds.
I don't have the time.
You don't have time for a 15-second synopsis? Man, maybe I don't want to be a dad anymore.
I got too busy with my kids. And when I'm not with my kids, I'm playing hockey. And when I'm not playing hockey, I'm reading Lord of the Rings. And when I'm not reading Lord of the Rings, I am probably having an anxiety attack like Riley. But here we are.
You're also being a good husband. Let's not forget that.
No, that too. Brandy in there as well.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, all joking aside, there is a lot to discuss with Tuesday for sure. I'm really anxious, speaking of, to get into this. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Tuesday is, in all honesty, going to be a really fascinating film to talk about. Mm-hmm. It will be one of the more unique films that you will see this year for reasons we'll talk about. So let's go ahead and jump in. The film is written and directed by Daina Pusić, and it stars Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Lola Pettigrew, Leah Harvey, Aaron Zay Keane. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Hmm.
If you're not familiar with Tuesday, as we talked about, it is about a mother and her teenage daughter. They must confront death when it arrives in the form of an astonishing talking bird. Yep, you
That's a
heard that
concept.
correctly.
That's a concept. I saw
Death.
them. I saw them promoting this movie, or at least I saw Julia Louis-Dreyfus promoting this on maybe Good Morning America or something like that, which is where I first discovered this concept. And I thought, I think we need to see this movie.
Yeah.
It just you
Oh,
don't
for
hear
sure.
concepts like that very often.
Well, I think the irony of how we open this conversation, I
Yeah.
did see some of the trailer earlier in the year, and either I was so tired that I completely missed the emotional thrust of the film, if it is in the trailer, or they did a really great job of hiding it. It could be either one of those because
Okay.
I walked
Okay.
in completely oblivious to
What
what
this movie was
the film
actually
was
about.
at its
Yeah.
emotional core. Yeah. However, what did draw me in is that death is visualized in the form of this size altering macaw.
Yeah.
And that was enough to get me excited. That sounded really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially with Julia Louis
We
Dreyfus.
we always want to try to see movies with high concepts like this. And in a lot of cases, they don't always work, but we like to applaud the attempts, right?
Yeah.
And whether that's how Tuesday ultimately lands for us, we'll get there. Uh, but when we hear a concept like this, we always sit back and think, let's give this a shot. And we know
Mhm.
some of our film critic friends have been talking about this. A few people that we
Mhm.
know have really liked it. We also have a few of our friends that have hated it. So it is,
Which
rightfully
is
so,
understandable.
a high concept like this. It's dividing audiences. That just makes me more interested, honestly.
Absolutely. So, Brendan, what did you think about Tuesday?
So, full disclaimer, I just got out of this movie a few hours ago.
Oh my goodness. This is the wrong approach, my friend.
It's the really wrong approach. I can't believe it. It's the only time I had to see it. And this is, yeah, it's a high concept movie with a lot of weird things. The bird raps in this movie. Like, let's just
Yep.
lay that out there. This is a very strange high concept movie that's played to sometimes very comedic effect. In a way, this is kind of a comedy, but it's also not at all. Uh,
Mhm.
I think this will be one of those conversations we have, JD, where my thoughts on the film will formulate as we talk about it.
Mhm.
At this point now, I was always fascinated by it. I'm not sure if I love it. I think it does maybe sometimes fall into some of those trappings that high concept movies might, especially from a first time director. I think it's very focused on that high concept that I am left wondering if it has much on its mind at a deeper level underneath that clever concept. I think it is, from a thematic standpoint, it might be pretty basic, but I was always mystified by what was happening here because I don't think I can recall death being visualized in this way. And when I say that, I don't mean as a macaw or as a bird. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. But death is utilized as a literal physical force in this movie, not just a metaphysical one. The only time I can actually think of death being utilized in that way is maybe, I don't know, one of the Final Destination movies or something, which is, of course, a very different approach and really is no comparison to what this movie Tuesday is doing.
Mhm.
But I like that death is actually portrayed quite literally, quite physically as an actual
Mhm.
presence. And when death can't do his job, there are ramifications, as we see here.
Yeah.
This kind of does turn into a quasi zombie apocalypse movie for a moment.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess maybe we can get into some of those as the conversation unfolds, especially as it relates to the actions of Zora, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I think it is a
Uh-huh.
good performance. I think the performances here are good. I am just left wondering if there is enough underneath the hood to really justify its clever concept. And maybe there is. Maybe
Okay.
we'll arrive to that as we talk about it further.
Mhm.
I'm left wondering if the film has any more to say other than death is natural, we must accept it. If that's all it's saying, I feel like that's a little unfortunate, but maybe there's more. Maybe we'll find it as this conversation goes. But until then, I'll simply say I was intrigued by this one, and I think it has good qualities.
Yeah, intrigued is certainly a good word. I saw this a few days ago, but similarly to Brendan, I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm still wrestling with it, but I can say confidently I loved its weird brazenness. It's like a darker flip of the mirror to something like a Monster Calls, and I was certainly gripped by that.
That's an interesting comparison. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, that immediately came to mind for me.
Okay.
It wonderfully leans into its premise, similarly to A Monster Calls, death personified as this grimy, sordid McCall that I just absolutely adore here. I love the vocal work by Arinze Keen. It's reminiscent to Andy Serkis's Caesar in terms of rhythm, but tonally and in terms of the effects, it's actually closer to Lockdown in the Transformers movies. And I found that striking too.
Only you would find a way to compare Tuesday with Transformers.
It is, though. I'm telling you, it very much is. What's most surprising about the film, though, as you were talking about there, it's how funny it is. Although maybe it's not, since it stars Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but I did find the film quite funny. For as fantastical as it is with death, the film's treatment of life-shattering loss and grief, it's weirdly grounded and honest. There isn't an ounce of melodrama or schmaltz here. It reminded me a lot of Evil Does Not Exist regarding that duality and how both films teeter between an evocative realism and metaphor. The metaphor is more overt here, which makes it a very different experience. But that equally makes the film's humor all the more important, because that's what flips the teeter to the other side. For as bizarre as it might be to see death depicted as a McCall, you kind of lose sight of that when you see that he loves hip hop, loves to rap, as you talked about, loves sarcasm. And I absolutely love that in this film.
He actually relishes in joyful things outside of just his job. Like he takes a bath and actually sings, right? It's little things like that. They're quirky, but there's also kind of a tenderness to it. Maybe it's because of the innocence of this being an actual animal, so we as humans just kind of latch onto that. But I don't know. I kind of appreciated that death is not depicted as this hooded dark figure that we're so used to seeing.
Yeah, I think all of that works here. I love the dynamic between Tuesday and Death. It is weirdly very endearing, and maybe it's because he's this McCall, as you're talking about. And I love that Tuesday recognizes him immediately. She never questions why Death, as this McCall, randomly shows up on her doorstep. She greets him as if she's been waiting for him, and it's kind of a comfort to her. Like, it gives her this weird comfort. So, say what you will about how obvious that may be within the framework of the metaphor, but there is a real honesty that I admire to this film. And we'll talk about this more as we go here, but that in contrast to Zora, Tuesday's mother, who clearly does not want to deal with the reality that her daughter is dying, is extremely poignant. But because it's Julia Louis-Dreyfus, she brings this comedic flavor to it that I think taps into the realism of her character and that emotional distancing that we see in Zora. I did find that polarity here really great. So, we can talk about how deep the well goes. I don't know if it goes as far as perhaps it's trying to. Again, we can talk that out. But regardless, I think there's a raw honesty that makes up for that.
Well, I think what is on the surface does work, and if that's enough to justify the movie working, then I think that's totally fair. Because I do think the mother-daughter dynamic is great. I'm with you on Tuesday's dynamic with Death himself. I think that's very tender, and how that juxtaposes Zora's relationship with Death. And where that leads in the third act, which I do want to talk about, I think it's there where the film starts to have some pretty interesting ideas outside of just its very obvious, oh, death is natural, we must accept it message, right? That's certainly key. That is certainly a big part of it. But I do think it starts to go places that could be potentially interesting if we choose to dig further. And where it starts is within the initial setup that left me with a lot of questions. And I think they might be deliberate. I don't think it's really a flaw here. And I'm curious what you think of this, because this situation that Death has found himself in, it presents itself as if this is a new situation or a new conundrum for Death, confronting someone that's trying to delay the inevitable. It basically suggests that Death comes to people who have now officially asked for death, right? Like this idea that, oh, now I'm encountering two people that are trying to push back on my efforts a little bit. And I feel like that's a pretty common thing. Like at least when people deal with death, their reaction is, okay, maybe I'm not ready for it. I want to push this back. And it seems to suggest that what Zora and Tuesday are going through is the first time this may have happened to Death. And Death even comes out and says, yeah, I was there when Jesus died. I was there when all these historical figures died. So I think it is kind of unbelievable that this might be the first time he's encountering something like this. But the film seems to suggest that that might be the case. That also might be a pretty interesting notion. That maybe death only works when he is called upon, when he's asked for, in a genuine way, when he's able to recognize that, yes, this person's asking for it for the right reasons, and they are ready to move on to whatever is next. They no longer have that fear. So if that's the case, I think that sort of, I guess, alleviates any of these lingering questions I may have had that could have been seen as flaws in any other movie that was maybe more mishandled. So I think that's a pretty interesting idea in and of itself.
Yeah, I don't know if death only works when called upon. We do see in those opening scenes that he's able to do his job. In fact, he does do his job despite those individuals mostly want him, like, are begging him to not be there. Like,
oh, see, I
begging him
got
to
the sense
leave.
they were begging for him. I got
Oh
the
no,
sense they were asking, I'm ready, I want to go.
oh no, I very much got the opposite sense
Oh,
that
interesting.
they
Okay,
are
I did not
not
get that.
calling for him. No,
I did not get
I think
that,
it's pretty well. I don't know. I guess not, since you and I see it differently. But even the verbiage that they echo there is indicative of them not ready for death. In fact, that's literally what one of the guys says. I'm not ready.
I thought he said,
And
I'm ready. That's what I heard.
oh no, yeah, he says I'm not ready, and then he goes, maybe the lady that's kind of sitting up, you could have that argument, but for the most part, it seems as if most of those individuals aren't quite ready for it. However, to your point, though, it does seem as if that does change throughout the film in a way that is partially because of Zora and the choices that she makes. But it is interesting how that does shift, which is why I do think in those opening scenes it wants to establish that death is not welcome in most cases, if not all cases. But here comes Tuesday, who has accepted her fate. She immediately recognizes death, as we mentioned, and instead of fighting him, as we see in the opening scenes, she immediately engages him. She tells him a joke, which he laughs at. You noted that. She gives him a bath. She empathizes with him, asks him about his experiences. And she tells Death that she is ready. The only thing she asks is that he doesn't do it in front of her mother. Now, given how things play out with Zora, her death is prolonged further. And in a weird way, you kind of admire the fight in Zora. However, as a result, their roles become reversed in the sense that Tuesday takes on the mature motherly role, where Zora has to grow beyond her denial, which I find interesting. And maybe there is something to be said about accepting your fate, accepting death, and how that gives you a level of sophistication that most might not reach when they're not ready to accept death
Mhm.
and his role in our lives. So I do find that interesting. Now, to your point and what you were
Mhm.
saying about death, because of Zora and how things play out in the final act of this film, there is an element where people do begin to beg for death.
Yeah.
But where I struggle within the spectrum that you laid out there a moment ago, the people that are begging for death in the back half of this film, it's not a result of naturalism as much as it is Zora.
Apocalyptic. It's
Yeah, exactly.
well,
Like
yeah, and
I guess I don't want to spell it out per se,
mhm.
but there's an element of where death should have occurred that was not happening because death was no longer around because of Zora. So the
Mhm.
circumstances aren't exactly the same as what we see at the beginning of the film,
I
for
guess,
example.
yeah. Yeah,
But it
I
does
get
beg the question. You're right. It does
well,
beg the
beg
question
the
because,
question, and I guess because I did see the sense that death is still introduced as judge, jury, and executioner, and in this scenario, encountering Tuesday and then encountering Zora, that role is tested for him. I guess I was sitting back there thinking, what makes Tuesday and Zora unique that he is struggling to do his job with them? Because I almost feel as if this situation shouldn't be new to him.
yeah,
And
which he speaks to, right? Because he says something to the effect when talking with Tuesday, I haven't spoken to anyone in a
yeah,
really long time.
hmm
So we know that he doesn't engage with people often. He's filthy, which
hmm
suggests that he's out there simply doing his job and that's it. And so he has this grimy appearance to him. And yet there's something about Tuesday and her welcoming him, which most of the time is not the response that he gets. It does flip something in him. And it is
yeah.
fascinating to see how that gives him this weird personality.
I will say, if there is another thing about this movie I did appreciate, it does showcase that the work of death's job is hard and stressful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like just in a very relatable way. I like that it does that. And
Well,
I
and
I
it would be stressful when you're doing something nobody, where nobody wants you around.
or
Like
when you're
it's going to
back
be a lonely job.
when you have to deal with what Julia Louis-Dreyfus does to him. Yeah, no wonder he's
Exactly
as
that
dirty
too.
as he is.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this is where the film gets kind of interesting, at least in the third act, and how it relates to Zora and her trajectory as a character. If there's anything underneath the surface that I think is potentially interesting, it's how she starts to take on a new role, we'll simply say, without spoiling the
Yeah.
movie. Because I think it creates this idea that when you fight back against death in a certain way, it's almost as if you now have to accept the burden of death, right? And that's more or less what I think symbolically she is representing, Zora specifically.
Mm.
So I think underneath, the movie is certainly about these things that death is natural. We must accept it. But if there is anything potentially interesting, it is in that idea that if we don't confront it, we cannot escape it. You know, we
Mm.
can't move on from it. We become so fearful of it that it becomes suffocating for us. It literally takes over our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And in her case, accepting that burden or taking on that burden rather is it almost creates this like this lingering question as if there's this vicious cycle happening here. Was death
Mm-hmm.
always personified as this macaw? Or was there maybe another time before that where death was personified differently? And maybe an encounter with this macaw was a similar situation that then had to accept that same burden. And now this has become this new vicious cycle. I don't know if that's what the movie's getting at, but it did make me think if there is
Mm.
this secular nature to those who have to accept that burden because they've refused to accept it correctly.
Yeah. A little bit of like the Santa Claus kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Just instead of, Christmas, it's death.
Exactly. No, I hear you. I think given how it plays out in the end, it's not quite that, but there is an element of it. There's
It's
no
certainly
doubt
working
about that.
it's maybe working in that way symbolically and not
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, I think you're getting to something interesting there with Zora, and I think that's where execution is perhaps what's what the difference is here for me anyway, because the arc of Zora isn't on its face, it isn't anything all that new or interesting. She's
Right.
a mother avoiding reality at all costs.
We've seen this
She's
before. Yeah.
selling everything she owns to a pawn shop. She's lying on bench for hours, and as soon as she gets home, she has a conversation with Nurse Billy, where she suggests that, hey, you need to spend time with your daughter. And when she does, Zora snaps at Billy. Again, it's
Yep.
equally played for laughs, but behind her jeers is a real pain that
It's pain.
isn't ready for, which is why she similarly lashes out at Death. She becomes a protective mother who literally fights him. She does not want Death anywhere near Tuesday, and visually we see her take that to an extreme that is somehow both grotesque and kind of funny. The metaphorical framework is again obvious, but it's expressive and full of conviction thanks to Louis-Dreyfus's performance. And then as you're talking about, there's this new role she takes on near the end of the film that becomes a form of catharsis for her. And it's where she finally learns that Tuesday's pain is deeper and more impactful than she ever could have imagined. And that was the biggest takeaway for me. It wasn't even that Zora had to confront Death, which she does. She fights against Death when she confronts him.
Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't even about confronting Death as much as it was learning something about her daughter that she didn't know before. And that's how much pain she was in.
Well, yeah.
And that's the reality that Zora could not really wrap her mind around until she took this new role.
Yeah.
And that is what changed everything for her. So the beach scene for me, I think, is incredible when it's funneled from that prism.
Well, yeah, and also the realization that her daughter's pain is not her own. You know, it's not her
Yeah.
choice. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's selfish of her to make these choices, even if she
Exactly.
thinks it is for the betterment of her daughter. And you're right, none of that is new, but as long as it's effective on the surface, and I do think it's still pretty effective here because of the performative nature of it. But yeah, like I said, this isn't new. This literally concludes on a beach scene. It got me thinking that, okay, the daughter should have been played by Eliza Scanlon again. It's like it should have been like this is baby teeth all over again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. And,
Yeah.
But the thing is, while it does play out in a baby teeth kind of manner, you've never seen it done this way. Like that beach
with a bird?
scene with the bird, the conversation, the editing there, the sound design, even like it is just hypnotizing in a
It's so
very
jarring
weird
because
way.
the movie is shot and visualized in a very practical way. And usually when movies are very high concept like this, I usually like to see a little bit of weirdness in the film's aesthetics to kind of match that high concept. But in this case, I think that jarring nature just adds to the humor a little bit. It just kind of adds to the quirkiness
yeah.
that this is visually and musically, performatively at times kind of played straight. And you just have this random like growing,
Yeah.
shrinking, wrapping bird that just kind
Yeah.
of intermingles through all of this. So
With the camera perspective of the bird in these places that are small and a little gross. I don't know. It's just really interesting
there's-
filmmaking.
there it gets to a point where it even gets a little Honey, I Shrunk the Kids a little
Yeah.
bit,
Uh-huh.
but without
Sure.
giving too much away. I feel like we're making comparisons, and people listening who haven't even heard of this movie are thinking, I have to see this now. We've made comparisons to zombie apocalypse movies, to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, to Baby Teeth, to God knows what else.
Transformers. Monster Calls.
Somehow, apparently, you made a Transformers reference in this movie.
That's his voice. Go back and listen to it.
I don't disagree. I just think it's hilarious that we have all of these movies in a blender, and honestly, all of them blended together. They do not make Tuesday. Like, they don't
I
make
know.
Tuesday, but it's yet at the same time, I feel like it weirdly becomes a selling point for how strange this movie is.
And no, it really is weird in that regard because on its face, emotionally speaking, it is desperately heartbreaking in a baby teeth kind of manner.
Mm-hmm.
And it is heartbreaking. It really is. There is a poignancy to the film, but there is like all of that realism though is funneled through humor. And that's the
this movie's
dichotomy of the film.
hilarious. This movie's
Absolutely.
hilarious. There's a scene where I think it's Zora who's reading a magazine, and on the cover of the magazine is a woman with a cheetah, and the headline says, "He's a cheetah." Actually, I wrote it down. It said, "He's a cheetah. Now I'm stuck with his zoo." It's like that is quite.
It's
funny.
great. It's really great. And I think if there is perhaps an element beyond the obvious metaphor, I
Mhm.
think it is trying to suggest something along the lines of us creating a relationship with death, because
Okay.
you see of course the personality of death come through when Tuesday opens up to her. You
Yeah.
talked about how he raps, and that is a great moment in this film. Absolutely hilarious.
Sure.
The moment of him talking about Jesus and his sarcasm. Oh, he was a sarcastic guy.
Yeah.
I love that
and then
moment.
he puts on the voice and tries
He
to
puts-
mimic him.
It's so good. Like, absolutely love that in the film.
Yeah.
And so you do see that he's more than just this mythical figure that is out to kill you. Obviously, he has a role to do, and that is his job. But the film tries to give nuance to him. And then you couple that with this moment at the end of the film that is weirdly tender, but again, still pretty funny, where he has a conversation with Zora, simply asking how she's doing. How are
You know
you?
what? You make a great point there because I did have that in the back of my mind. I think the coda to this film is the best scene in the movie.
It is really great. I agree. It honestly could be, because
That kind of made the movie for me in many ways.
it really does, because you do kind of you come to understand that he cares. Like, he has a job, but he does care about Zora genuinely. And they have a great interaction there. He wants to give her some hope, some genuine hope, kind of manipulates the situation a little bit in the ways that he can, but that's the fun of the character.
But that's his job, right?
That's his job. And I love the reaction there from Zora, because again, because of the character and the performance and how it kind of taps into that comedy, she's just like, okay, great, now you can F off, or whatever she says there. Like, it's this funny little quip, but you know, like that, like the film wants to tap into its realism through this humor, like, and this nuance, this endearing relationship that you can form with death. It doesn't have to be this one-sided thing where death shows up and that's it, but there's more to be had there. And I do find that fascinating. That is an interesting concept.
There's profundity there for sure. Death in that moment in that coda has a very specific definition of the afterlife that I never really thought about.
Yeah.
Because we always pose that question in ourselves: is there an afterlife or is there not? And death comes out and says there is, but what he calls the afterlife is something you might not expect, or at least something you might not have thought about. And it's obvious, but it's profound because it's obvious. Like, it's one of those things like, huh, that's a great point. I never thought of that.
And
That's
it's
the
really
reaction.
the only truth we have.
Right.
It's the only thing that we can control.
Yeah.
As it relates to how we understand our life here. And, you know, and that's, I don't want to open up a Pandora's box as to what people believe or don't.
Yeah, we're not getting into a religious talk here.
Not trying to get into any of that. But the reality is, all we know is this life. What's on the other side, We'll all find out one day.
Yeah.
But the one thing that death tells Zora in this moment is something that we can truly control. And I do find that absolutely fascinating. So it is interesting how the film suggests we have a relationship with death, even if we don't realize that we do or that we can. And it doesn't have to be bleak and in the ways that we think of it to be. It can be a little bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah. And I think that's
so I
very
find that
profound for
interesting.
sure.
Yeah,
And the
I agree.
final line of dialogue, which leads to that final cut to black, is kind of pitch perfect, honestly.
Yeah.
A little tongue in cheek, a little silly, but also
Yeah.
not at all. I think it's silly maybe in the tone and just the abruptness of it. But yeah, I don't know. I weirdly have a soft spot for movies that just kind of end and you don't expect it. And this one does, and I think it rightfully does that. It actually is really well done.
I completely agree. Do you have any final thoughts on Tuesday?
I just want to comment once again on the without giving it away, the apocalyptic nature of this movie and how
that is it is a little weird.
it is weird. There's a whole segment of this movie that does become literally quite apocalyptic, and it's because for reasons we won't get into, there is a moment when death is unable to do his job. And it leads to moments where people actually cannot die. And the way they describe this situation and some of the things that we see,
it's gruesome. Yeah.
I think the nurse said when she came to the house, like, a dog without a head started barking at me or something like that.
Yeah.
Zombie
cows or something like that you hear
zombie
on the news.
cows. There's a man without legs.
Yeah.
And we don't see what happens to these people. It's just something happened and science says they can't bleed to death, right?
Yeah.
So,
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. But the visualization of that it's jarring. It's very jarring. For those who find this movie to be a tonal mess, I mean, I didn't really find it that way, but I can't necessarily disagree if people were to say that, because it is juggling a lot of things. It has a lot of tones on its mind, and that's certainly evidence of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of the most bizarre things I've seen all year, and it was probably the element of the film I was wrapping my head around the most when walking out of the
it's
theater.
understandable.
I understand the idea behind it, that death isn't able to do his job, so the world begins to fall apart.
Yeah.
And you couple that with Zora and her motives, like the idea that she wants to confront death. She wants to keep it away from her daughter.
Yeah.
And as a result, the world begins to fall apart. So in a lot of ways, it becomes the crux of what we just talked about in terms of having a relationship with death. It's not something that you can, that you can just remove from the world.
Yeah.
Because there is an order that needs to take place. And it obviously ends up tying to what she ends up learning with Tuesday in terms of people's pain and how selfish it is for you to keep that to yourself when these people are suffering.
Yeah.
They are suffering. And to something you said earlier, when you're suffering to such a degree that some people do want to welcome it. And death needs to be available in order to make that happen. Like, that is a fascinating angle that you just don't see in movies all that often.
Yeah. Agreed.
And the way it's visualized here, you especially have never really seen it before. So, the film is certainly working with tropes and ideas that aren't new, but the way they are tackled here in execution, it is certainly one of a kind.
Yeah.
And I do admire the film for that, for sure.
Yeah. I'm with you.
All right. Anything else? I think that's it. We've covered everything. What did you think of Lola Pettigrew's performance this Tuesday?
I thought she was very commanding. I've never seen her before, but I'm very curious to see what she does next. I think she's very good.
Yeah, I thought she was very good as well. Love how she is able to work with a CGI McCall. It's fantastic stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'll do it. I don't know if I have any other thoughts on it. A very moving film, a weird movie. I enjoyed it.
I'm still not fully in love with it, but I'm still curious to see it again, which is an interesting thing to say.
Yeah, I will say this, and I know this has been a talking point on the show for many years.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly it's not a masterpiece. It's not flawless, but I am really curious to see more from Daina Pusić going forward.
Mm-hmm. It has ambition. It has ambition. It's not a failed ambitious effort. It does have some moments where it trips over those ambitions.
Yeah.
But again, we say this all the time. I'd rather see that than safe mediocrity.
Absolutely. Completely agree. So whatever she has up her sleeves next, I'm there. I'm ready for it. I'm intrigued to see what.
Yeah.
What
If
she
this is a
has.
debut with this kind of control, then I think she'll get even better. Like when it comes to debut films, you don't get a movie like Get Out all that often, right? You don't get someone to hit it out of the park right away.
It does not happen all the time.
Does
Most
not
of the
happen.
time, it does not.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I'd say this is successful more than it's not in its ambition. It doesn't all work, but I think it gets there in the end. So
Yeah.
good stuff.
I think so too.
At any rate, let us know what you think. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can hit us up on social media if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Absolutely.
You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com as well. Okay, I think that'll do it, Brendan.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on anything before we get out of here, my friend?
I just have to say, for a little bit of inside baseball, we already made the joke many times that we recorded this on a Monday. It's releasing on a Thursday. You saw it on a Saturday. I technically saw it on a Monday. So there's no Tuesdays in reference to our experience with this
Not
movie.
to ours. Yeah.
But, I mean, we're recording this late at night. I was secretly hoping we made it past midnight so we can say we did record this on a Tuesday. But alas, we're not there
quite.
yet.
No,
We're not there
we're
yet.
not going to make it. No. Yeah, we just couldn't shoehorn in Tuesday at all.
No,
So
we
we
can't
do
go 30 more
apologize to the film for that. But,
Yeah.
it's one of those films you can't really recommend, but I would be curious to hear from others, truly. Because I did like it. I liked the film. I was moved by it. I do recognize where it might stumble, but I think there's a lot of good here, and it's really funny. Like Julia Louis-Dreyfus, I think is terrific here.
I think she's very good.
Moving,
Yeah.
She's very moving, but man, is she also biting comedically, as she always is. And she rides that line tonally just impeccably. It's fantastic
I'm
stuff.
with you.
So, at any rate, that'll do it. Be sure to go and check out our conversation on Inside Out 2. The main show this weekend, we talk a lot of Pixar. We talk our movie series that we're doing. We continue a lot of that. And then we transition to this weekend where we get Jeff Nichols. He's back, baby.
Riding some bikes. We're riding
cannot
some
wait
bikes. A little easy
Get to the
riding
bike
here.
riders. Oh my gosh. Cannot wait to get into all of that as well.
Yeah.
With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Death is a talking macaw. Incredible.
Happy Monday.